Good morning, boys and girls. It might be afternoon by the time you see this. We are on to chapter 14 in Gordon Corman's The Hypnotists. We have just heard and met Mr. Braintree, Axel Braintree. He does the Sandman's Guild, and he gave Jax a business card. So let's see if we can find out. Jax also just found out that his mom has a history of hypnotism in her family. Maureen Samuels was a former Miss Nebraska who originally came to New York to seek her fortune as a model. Despite her spectacular good looks, her hypnotic abilities always held her back. She seemed unfocused on the runway as she tried to make sense of the pip visions from spectators she'd unintentionally bent. Dr. Mako had rescued her from a fashion rat race and encouraged her to develop her mesmeric skills. Alas, her power as a mindbender never lived up to its potential, and since she was unfit to be one of Santa's hypnos, the director offered her a job running the place. She also gave weekly lectures on the history of hypnotism. Jax always had trouble concentrating during these because A, it was pretty dull stuff, and B, every time he looked at Ms. Samuels for more than a few seconds, his mind went all foggy. He was embarrassed to admit that this had nothing to do with hypnotism. After more than a month at Santa, you'd think he'd be used to how gorgeous she was. But then she'd turn a certain way, and he'd see her from an angle that he'd never noticed before, and it would start all up again. The other boys had the same problem, with the possible exception of the Lancaster Singers, one of whom always seemed to be mesmerized by the other. Wilson, too, seemed immune, or maybe he was just too mean to show it. The only thing that kept Jax reasonably alert was the name Opus, which dropped from those luscious lips on a regular basis. Dad didn't know the half of what his famous family had stuck their noses into over the years. Every walk of life seemed to have an Opus in the background, using hypnotic power for every purpose, from altering the course of nations to making a fast buck on the side. There was Captain Cornelius Opus, the ambassador, and Lucas Opus, the spy, Amalescent Opus, Born, the audience-bending ballerina. Even when the name was von Kelben or Ivanov, sooner or later a connection to somebody Opus would surface. Yet when the history books were written and the world would read about the Pony Express, the Russian Revolution, the invention of the telephone, or Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game, there was no mention of the Opus behind the scenes who helped make it happen. But in today's lecture, the name that came up, rattled around in Jack's head, was not Opus. It was Sparks. Remember, back in the last chapter, we learned that that was a name connected to his mom. After being accosted by Axel Braintree, Jax had asked his mother if she knew any relatives named Sparks. She looked so completely blank that he'd believed her. But according to Ancestry.com, there had been an aunt named Beatrice Sparks Tremblay, living in a castle in England in the early 1800s. The website hadn't offered much more information than that, but the castle part seemed to support what Braintree had said about the Sparks family being rich. Dad had never heard of the Sparkses either, but his reaction was different. My head explodes every time I think about my own wingnut family. Don't ask me how somebody else's. It was pretty mind-blowing. Mom and Dad had met on a blind date at a roller rink. Uniting the two greatest mesmeric bloodlines in history had been the last thing on their minds. What were the odds? Mom was in denial. It's a coincidence. There must be dozens of old families named Sparks. Poor Dad. He spent his whole childhood terrified that his parents were messing with his mind. Imagine his relief when he believed that the family talent had ended with his mother and father. Then one night he strapped on a pair of roller skates. Ashton Opus was having a lot of flashbacks to his youth these days. I wash the car every Saturday. I used to look forward to it all week. I think I got into the car business because I loved taking care of those old sedans. His brow clouded. Or maybe your grandparents just were too cheap to go to the car wash. None of these conversations took place head-on. Dad now preferred to address Jax from the side. He was paranoid that his son might be trying to hypnotize him, just as his parents had. Even when they had no choice but to face each other over a chessboard, for example, Mr. Opus focused on a spot over Jax's left shoulder. How messed up was that? His own father wouldn't look at him. There were These were the thoughts that rolled in Jax's head when Ms. Samuel spoke the name Braintree and supplied the name Braintree had supplied and Mom had denied. Sparks? He choked out. The assistant director frowned at him from the front of the lecture room. Sparks used to be a very common name in the hypnotic circles. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Sparks hypnotists contributed more to the refinement of our craft than anyone else. They never asked for a reward, nor did they accept one. It was the scandal of the family when Dr. Franz Mesmer began to use the gift to make money in 18th century Paris. Mesmer, Wilson whistled. The big dog was a Sparks? There was no brighter star in the hypnotic history than Franz Mesmer. Mesmerism was named after him. Plenty of the famous people happened to be mind-benders, from Winston Churchill to Eminem. Mesmer was more than that. He was famous for his hypnotic abilities. If Mom was really a Sparks, her pedigree might be even more top-notches than Dad. He was born a Sparks, but they disowned him, Miss Samuels replied. Mesmer is considered the father of our art, but those on the inside know that he was just another huckster. The kind of behavior that might have been acceptable among the Opuses or the Dinsies, or even the mysterious Perigoles, but the Sparkses would never have tolerated it. Kira raised her hand. What happened to the Sparks family? Are they still active in the hypnotic community? The assistant director shook her head. Their talents became diluted, and their descendants lost their power. What happened to them is anybody's guess. If you'd bothered to check the chiropractic clinics, Jess could help, reflecting. You could have gotten your neck cracked or your spine realigned by me. Did Miss Samuels know? Did Dr. Mako? He thought back to Braintree's words. Dr. Mako knows everything I know and more. If he's withholding information, it's because he doesn't want you to realize how special you are. Oh, sure. Believe some old geezer with a gray ponytail over a respected scientist. And yet, Jax was 99% sure Axel Braintree was full of baloney, but 99 wasn't the same as 100. There was a way to get to the bottom of this. The Sandman's Guild had a meeting tonight. Braintree had written the address on the card. The two words came to Jax as in a hypnotic vision. Don't go. Hadn't enough crazy stuff happened already? Did he really think Braintree, of all people, would bring order to the chaos? Yet on the subway that night, Jax wasn't even surprised when he abandoned his train in favor of the shuttle to the West Side lines. The one would drop him off just a few blocks from the address on the card. Jackson Opus was going to a meeting. Okay, so he is going to this meeting to find out what he can about his mom's side of the family, and if maybe that was a situation where, what if, I don't know, I'm just thinking, but what if his mom and dad's families used hypnotic powers to bring them together? I don't know. What do you guys think? Bye.